So, in an industry where it feels like incredibly flooded, oversaturated, and just plain overwhelming, with either just mediocre as hell shows or just plain bad shows, it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I feel so burdened with the hundreds of streaming services that I have to keep up with, from Viki, Asian Crush, Cocoa, IQYI, Bibli, etc. It's really easy to get wrecked, and just once in a while to want a piece of work that makes you feel a little bit treasured, a tiny bit cherished, and a whole lot of validated. Enter I Feel You Linger in the Air. The story is sort of simple. It follows our main character, Jom, an architect responsible for the renovation of a historic house in modern-day Thailand. Within that house, Jom discovers this wooden chest packed with old drawings, and these drawings look strangely familiar, but he doesn't give it a second thought. He kind of just puts it at the back of his mind and leaves for Bangkok to see his lover. But then when he gets to Bangkok, he finds out that his boyfriend is engaged to someone else. Super down bad and heartbroken, Jom comes to a place of acceptance and runs his car into the river. Basically, Jom will find himself in the 1920s Chiang Mai and ends up at the same historic house that he was looking at the beginning of the show. Except in the present, and there he becomes the main servant of Kunyai, the son of a lord of the house in this different reality. So that's the story. It's pretty well thought of, I would say. I believe it's based on a novel, and to be quite honest with you, I'm more interested in the show and looking at it as a standalone piece of media instead of doing comparisons. I haven't really done a ton of investigations on the original material. And as far as the show is as a standalone media, it is unambiguously good. One of the reasons I Feel You Linger in the Air is so good is because it has this captivating cast of characters. It provides really deep characters with various moral compasses who are all profoundly human, while at the same time letting audiences delve into their psychology. Everyone from Jom, someone who feels unsettled and quite certain about a lot of things, Jom's ex-boyfriend who basically cheats on him, Fong Kao, someone who fights to gain acceptance and autonomy in really either of the worlds. Ming, a morally gray character who changes drastically throughout the duration of the show. And of course, Kunyai, someone who doesn't like the hard things and chooses to stay away from them as much as possible. None of these characters are one-dimensional or are portrayed straightforwardly in a black and white manner. Generally, the development of good characters with profoundly human traits is something that a pretty solid set of showrunners with multiple years of experiences provide. The idea is that each character should possess very unique traits, a complex life and values, and a set of intricate moral compulsions, and as well as strong personality that interacts and exists in conflicts with other characters in compelling ways, which I feel like I Feel You Linger in the Air delivers with flying colors. Characters in the show vary depending on the type of relationship they have with each other. It's never really evangelized, but one thing is for sure, it's pretty consistent. As audiences, we want to connect with them as deeply as possible, perhaps even growing to love them. This requires making characters flawed and profoundly human, not abandoning parts of their personality that we deem not worthy or bad for the convenience or for like a bow-like ending. Let's take Jom and Yai for instance. These characters were given circumstances that are wildly different, yet time after time we're able to see them interacting with like this compelling and memorable manner that makes them really likable but also morally questionable. By the end of the show, we have fallen in love not just with them but each of the characters within I Feel You Linger in the Air, as it deeply humanizes the characters. Nobody is treated as a plot device. This is an issue I have with a lot of BL writing. There is reasoning behind each of the choices of the characters, including Yai's father, Jom's ex-boyfriend. Even the villainy of characters is explained quite well, which allows you to see their motivation and the circumstances that ended up including Robert. It never tries to justify the bad actions of characters, but it does delve into their psychology extensively, and I feel like it's quite rare for a show with so much rich history and complexities to do that well and fully. If a showrunner is not able to compel us with a pilot episode and premise, it might be a good idea to rework the premise and the strength of the show. What I'm saying is making a good show with good stories that don't feel like this like dotted and abstract lines on a random map is hard. There needs to be a strong link that compels us to care about all the stories. One of the strengths of a good premise show, like I Feel You Linger in the Air, is that it gauges how the premise can perpetually generate new storylines. This means, can it branch out into something even more compelling and tells us something about the central players of the show, and most importantly, it makes us care about the branching stories. The dialogue is not cringy, and it doesn't feel like it was produced in 5 minutes. I know it takes generally a shit ton of work to pull a show in general, any show. But with this show, you're able to see how much work went into it. All the stories are connected, and it doesn't fall into a trope of distracting us with theatrics or adding fluffs that feels too unaligned with the writing. Kunyai and Jones' dialogue is so well done, and it feels quite natural, and I feel like it is this great old romantic story than it is more than a bunch of flowery languages. They used a lot of Northern Thai cultural elements like the plumeria flowers, the food at the time, the historical revolution, as well as the weaving of the characters that feels embedded in the fundamental retelling of the story. Nothing feels like an afterthought. They used elements of cinematography, characters, psychology, romance, not as a plot device, but as a holistic form to bolster the story even more. There's a lot of shows and movies that are being produced and are being reproduced in many ways. Every show is somehow retelling something that has been already explored. The genius is in being able to retell stories we're familiar with, stories about love, loss, grief, desire in a new format, new tone, and with new characters we grow to love. If you're creating a general run-of-the-mill story, the premise is going to be pretty common. This is actually one of my favorite things about I Feel You Linger in the Air. It does tell a story that we're familiar with. It's nothing groundbreaking, a story about love, intimacy, abuse, and power, but it tells it in a new way, in a more refreshing way. Layers of really thought of cinematography, story medium, like the time travel element, for instance, the embedding of the flowers, the poverty and the wealth gap difference, and unguarded, non-gamified dynamics between the characters that are in love. It allows us to be acquainted with these familiar emotions of desire, loss, lust, love in a new way. Everything is so intentionally designed. The OST, or the original soundtrack, for instance, during the intimate scenes, layer the emotions that we're already experiencing instead of inciting distraction or covering a low-quality storytelling with okay editing. The color grading adds to each of the moments a new tone rather than using this weird haze all throughout. Flashback is used tactfully or it reveals something new about the characters at any moment. It is not necessarily used as a placeholder to lengthen the show's running time. That's super hard to do without the showrunners thinking differently about the impact of each moment within the show. The showrunners are consistent with what they're saying throughout the theme of the show, and nothing is left unsaid, unless purposefully so. The pilot was what hooked me to tune in every week, and it's quite impressive to do that within a time travel show that doesn't get quite repetitive by episode, 3. Usually, I'm not a fan of time travel stories because it is terribly done. The science of most time travel shows and movies is so baffling that it's hard to take serious. So the choices of the actual logistics of the time travel are either over explained, and so they take a lot of the time. They take time away from the actual story of the show. So we're kind of caught up with this, the logistics and the science of the time travel. The science of the time travel with And I Feel You Linger in the Air is kind of doesn't really make sense. Then we get into an insufferable conversation. So does the past affect the present? Blah, 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 blah. And we can be sticklers and really crack down upon the time travel premise and the logistics, but let me just tell you a secret. I Feel You Linger in the Air gives me little information about the actual mechanics of the wormhole, and instead allows me to focus on the character's motivation, redemption, discovery of self, which honestly are elements of the stories that I care more about. It didn't try to go, into like Marvel or Looper or over-explain something that they're ultimately going to contradict. They just said, focus on the other good stuff. And from episode 1, that's what they just did. The story gave me an impression of a well-thought-of premise that allowed me to think deeply about these characters and their motivations and their values and their dynamic with each other. It really allowed me to deeply care for each of the characters and introduce me to them in both of the worlds, the past and the present. Did some questionable and some unresolved things happen at the end? Yes. But I do think it's quite memorable. That's kind of all I care about. As much as I talk about some grounded and reality shit a lot since I basically started this channel, this is a time travel show, guys. And there is a limit to the amount of reality and logic that is embedded within that. The story provides no theatrics, but rather it resolves the love, the intimacy of the characters like Yai and Jom, the sister that I cannot pronounce her name for the life of me, and May. And it's gorgeous in the way that it does that. It takes its time. It doesn't move with urgency, which is really hard to do at a finale. Is it a perfect show? Of course not. There is very few shows that fit that description. And it's a hard thing to do, honestly. But it does them unambiguously well. Let me just say this. All of these things would be irrelevant if the actors weren't good. Bright and Not Cool, who played Jom and Yai, and the ensemble cast put their heart and soul into this show. The chemistry is undeniably effortless. The kissing and the scenes and the love scenes, which I don't know when this conversation started, but someone on Twitter was saying that those are not part of acting. You don't have to be good at having chemistry with your co-star basically. And I hate to be breaking your hearts, but if none of that landed well, then I would not be making this video. We can talk about motivation of characters, cinematography, psychology of the premise, and without the actors being able to deliver those things, it's kind of just a pretty show, and I'm not really interested in just a pretty show. All that to say that the team did everything pretty good, only a few complaints, but they're not important or large enough to make a call out even in this video about them. I just love this show, and I don't think there's anything that I can do that's more impactful than making a whole video. And I didn't complain. It's me. What did you guys think? Did you enjoy it? Did you have a good time watching the show? I'm definitely thinking about rewatching it. I mean, the world is a horror show right now, and it's been for a minute. But I think it's a good distraction in between everything else that's going on in your life. I hope you're drinking some good tea. I hope you're spending time with your loved ones, and I hope you're doing things to take care of yourself, because it is not an easy time right now. So, bye guys.